Hello and welcome again to the Yarra Valley Living Centre and to another episode of Living Well. And today we're having part 2 with Jude Pemmell. I think you remember that we spoke with Jude about resilience from the heart. And there's so much to share with Jude with such a rich life. Last time we were mostly talking about her experience in the prisons. And today, let's see where we go. So welcome back, Jude.
Thank you, Morning.
Yeah.
Nice to be back.
So I believe you have done work in Manus Island, and I just wonder how you felt when you were asked to go there, or did you offer? Because this is the first thing, like even accepting a situation where we know that we're going to have resilience. So how did it start?
Well, it started, I'd been working for the organisation who provides the mental health and medical teams in the detention centres. I'd been working for them, for 3 years when they asked me to go. And they called me. I was actually working in regional New South Wales, doing some training professionals in my field. And so I was out in the country, and my phone rang, and they said to me, "Where would you like to go?" And I said, "Well, you usually tell me where you'd like me to go." And they said, "You can go absolutely anywhere." And they said, "We would love you to go to Manus or Nauru." And I said, "Where would I be the most useful at the moment?" Because I have a very broad skill set, and I know that not many people who worked for them had my skill set. In fact, it was really only me. There was one other person who worked with families and kids. That was it. Mm. And so they said, "Well, we'd love you to go to Manus." And I said, "That's where I'll go."
Just straight off like that. Didn't even think about it.
Yes. One thing I always did when I was doing this work, and this was really from the beginning, I thought, I'm not going to try and manipulate anything. Mm. I just want to be very surrendered in terms of the work, and I'll just do whatever they ask me to do.
Really, and they're so lucky to have somebody willing to be like that.
Look, a lot of the people who worked for them had this attitude, I think. Mm. And but they would suss us out over time. Mm. They'd start us off working in a city detention centre, and then they'd send us to a remote centre or a regional centre, see how we coped with that. And so we would up the ante. Mm. And some people couldn't cope beyond a centre in the city. Mm. But wherever they sent me, I loved.
Okay.
Mm. And the other great thing that was happening was I was seeing my country. I was seeing places that I would never go to as a tourist because they were all remote.
Yeah.
And, I mean, when they sent me to Darwin, I was thrilled because at that time we had 6 centres there, and I worked in all of them.
Right.
And I absolutely adored Darwin.
Did you work mostly with Indigenous people, or was it across?
Oh, there weren't. No, we didn't have Indigenous people in detention. Only refugees and asylum seekers.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I was asked to work with Indigenous people while I was there, funnily enough, doing a sort of flying doctor psychological service. Mm. But I wanted to stick with the refugees.
What you were doing.
Yes.
So Nauru is not even in Australia.
No, nor is Manus.
Mm.
Manus is part of PNG. Both the islands are just south of the equator.
Mm.
And they're about that far apart on the map.
Yeah.
Quite a long way apart, but same latitude.
So very, very hot.
Yes, very hot, a lot of rain, pretty much a balanced temperature all year, but hot and very humid.
Yeah.
Yeah, but tropical. And I love the tropics. I do very well.
Okay, that's good. Okay, so now you're on the plane, you're touching down in Manus Island. Was that your first post, Manus, or
Nauru came later.
Okay, so you touched down in Manus. You got off
down
the
in
plane.
Manus, and I'd been flying all the previous day. Well, from about lunchtime. Flew to Brisbane, had a holdover in Brisbane, then hopped on the plane to Moresby.
Oh.
And that plane flew through the night, the afternoon and the evening, the night. And we arrived there, and it's very, very dangerous. And they said to us, you have to run.
Why was it dangerous? Why was it dangerous?
PNG is very dangerous.
Yeah, I've heard that. I've heard there's a lot of unrest.
It's the most violent country on earth that is not at war.
Yeah.
So they said to us, you have to run.
Oh,
get your luggage and you run.
Carrying your luggage?
Yeah, with your luggage. International terminal to the domestic terminal. Well, look, I never took very much luggage, fortunately, because you don't need much in the tropics. And because we wore uniforms, that made it really easy.
But a lot of people have been taking their things of comfort.
No, yeah, well, my only thing of comfort was my laptop.
Okay, great.
That was it.
Yeah.
So, and a couple of books. So we got on the plane, and it does this island hop all around the place, like a taxi service. So we were up, down, up, down, up, down. We got to Manus at very early in the morning, maybe about 6 or 7, and I was taken out to the ship. We lived on a ship because we're just in the jungle, working in the jungle.
No buildings, no development.
No infrastructure, no development, absolutely nothing. And we were briefed. Then I was taken to the compound, sent into a shipping container to get a uniform. And I remember the uniforms were all, because I'm quite petite, the uniforms were all for big people. And I had pretty much guessed that would be the case. So I had my own gear. And then I was, got changed and was sent in.
Started day one.
Day one.
Wow.
And so I went out with another member of the mental health team, and she said, I want you to come and talk to these 2 men. And she took me into this. I mean, the accommodation was horrifying. It was worse than I have seen in India, in the slums. It was just a notch up from the juggies with the plastic bags and sacks, and bits of cardboard carton. Anyway, we went in and there were 2 men in this very dark room. It had no window. It just had a door. It was a tiny little room, no air conditioning. They were both lying on mattresses on the floor. They didn't even have beds. There were no cupboards for their things. Their things were all on the foot of their bed. The room was so small. And there was about that much room between their mattresses. And so we went in. They were smoking with the door closed, no window, no aircon.
And 40
I
degrees.
can't tell you what it was like. And it was sweltering. And they were in such I'll say, first of all, call it apathy.
Right.
That's how I understood it, or how anyone else would understand it. But there is a term we use for this, and it's called homeostatic defeat.
Oh, right.
And when a person goes into homeostatic defeat, it is really hard to get them out of it. They weren't eating, they weren't showering, they weren't changing their clothes, they weren't doing anything for themselves, no exercise, no socialising, nothing. And that horrified me because they weren't interested. Their friends were being, they were very communal, these people in detention. They would look after each other. If someone was sick, they were mentally ill, they would just, friends would shower, would get them under the shower, would give them a shave, would look after them, bring them food, all that stuff. But their friends were just despairing because we went and talked to them, their friends afterwards. And so this mental health nurse who had asked me to go and meet the men, I said, well, they're in homeostatic defeat. And if they're not taken off the island, they will just get worse and worse, which is what happened. And so welcome to Manus Island.
Yeah. So can I just go back and unpack a few things there? First of all, in that situation, 40 degrees, small room, smoking, and I can imagine such an oppressive atmosphere, not just the whole setup, but also people that, didn't seem to have a will to live. So talking about resilience, what did you do mentally? Like, how did you cope with that? What happened for you?
Well, it got much worse.
For you?
Oh, yes. Because I arrived just after the so-called riots. And what I was soon to discover when I went into my compound, which was where the worst of that event had taken place, everybody, and I was taken down there next, was the level of trauma of everybody. And I went down there, we spent hours there, we had lunch there with some of the refugees, which was something that I liked to do, was eat with them, a lettuce leaf or two and a piece of tomato was usually all I could get. But
as a vegetarian, a vegan.
But anyway, the whole place was like this really heavy energy just hung over the whole place. And it was the energy of trauma.
First of all, how did you manage yourself? What did you do to hold together, really?
Well, Morny, I did probably what you would do. There was a little church. It was Catholic by denomination on the island. It was the only church on the island. And I would walk past it, going for a walk between the ship and the compound, the long way. And I just thought, I'll see if it's open. And it was open. And so I would go and I would sit in there because the only place I could be alone. And I sat there with the Virgin Mary, the statue of the Virgin Mary, and I felt very comforted being in there. And I would go in every day and I would spend a couple of hours in there meditating.
Oh, yeah.
Because there wasn't anywhere else I could be alone, you know, to meditate. I'd get up very early in the morning, as we do, and I'd meditate in my cabin. And my bunk, we slept in bunks. I had the bottom bunk and there was a window next to me. I'd look out and there was a light on the headland outside the window. So I would have these beautiful meditations, and there was a local nurse I was sharing my cabin with, a lovely, lovely woman. And she said to me after a few weeks, she said, "What are you doing at 4 o'clock in the morning?" And I said, "Oh, I'm just meditating. I hope I'm not disturbing you." And she said, "No, you're not, but I want to do it too."
Oh, wonderful.
Because it wakes me up and I can feel it. What wakes me up is what I can feel, because you're not making any noise. And so that, you know, I thought was amazing, but it was, you know, it's in these moments where you've got to call on your spiritual resources.
Yeah.
Because that's really, in a situation like that, all I had. I mean, I have all my skills, but we certainly weren't getting any proper clinical supervision with that company. And, you know, we would have 2 or 3 staff meetings a day. That's how intense and how stressful it was. And it was a very eventful time for me. I decided to plan my own groups, and I went out into the compounds with interpreters, and I spoke to all the different cultural groups, and I asked them how I could help them. And they told me very clearly, we need stress management.
Yeah.
They said we need stress management. We can't sleep. So we did sleep groups, we did stress management, and I did relaxation, because and we did art therapy. I'm also an art therapist. So it was all about bringing them right down, you know, into a de-escalated state, because they were doing it so tough, all of them.
And knowing
whether
Judy,
whether they'd been involved in the right.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, knowing that their situation is probably not going to change anytime soon, you probably also help them to build their resilience.
Well, this was my focus. And when I'd first gone to Darwin at the beginning of 2012, I worked with a absolutely fabulous psychologist. Well, I worked with lots of them, but this person in particular did a lot of human rights work, and she was as passionate about human rights as I am. And so she and I put our heads together, and both of us were very, very influenced in the work we were doing in detention. We were influenced by Viktor Frankl. Do you know who he is?
Yeah.
So for anyone who may be watching this, his book, Man's Search for Meaning, to us was the supreme work on resilience. And, you know, we were trying to buy in translations of that book in Farsi and Arabic and, you know, all the languages that we could get it in. That was in Darwin. And so we were using a combination of his logotherapy and what we in my field call strength-based work, and many other other things as well. So
So logotherapy basically is a way to find meaning. Is that
yes,
how you?
yes, a way to find meaning enough to get through the situation you're in.
Yeah.
And hope it, on the understanding that it will end.
Mm.
And so one of the things I always said to them was, this will end.
Yeah.
You may think it's indefinite.
Yeah.
But nothing lasts forever. It cannot. And, I used to say to them that our current Prime Minister, who was incredibly punitive, he will not last in office for more than a certain length of time. And so when he goes, things will change. And, of course, he did go, but things got worse.
Yeah, I was going to say, did they change? Mm.
They got worse, and which was, just horrendous. But anyway, Manus is closed now.
Mm.
It was closed years ago.
Mm.
So, yes, things do change. Everything changes. But we used the work of Viktor Frankl because, he was, what he was talking about in his book was how he helped the prisoners of war get through in the camps, Auschwitz, and the other camps, the Nazi camps, and how he would go and find people who were suicidal or who had given up. They were in that apathy that I spoke of, that homeostatic defeat, when really the life force can no longer support the organism. There is no more inner resource to support life. It's purely biological, and that won't last forever. So, and he had a measure of success, and so that's why we used his work. And so he was my guiding light in many ways.
Right.
And the other thing that influenced me very much and has influenced me in my work are the teachings of Buddha. And Buddha's teaching of impermanence and uncertainty, and some other things, and especially that idea of spreading loving kindness, and that sometimes this is all you can do. Because I also found that I was in a fragile state myself quite a lot of the time, because of the horror of what I was witnessing every minute of the day. Because I was there 12 hours a day minimum, sometimes 15, 6 days a week in the compound. And there was a road down the centre of the compound on Manus. It was full of potholes. It was a dirt road. And when you walked down that road, on either side of you were men in cyclone wire cages. And we called it, in the mental health team, we called it the walk of shame. And every time I walked along that road, which was 15 times a day, maybe, it would get to me. It would totally get to me. And as I'd walk along, the men would run over, because they all knew us. They would run over and they'd just try and put their hand, or a few fingers through the cyclone wire, so I could go and hold their hand.
Just for touch.
Hold their fingers, just for that, that, that care, that love.
So, Judy, how long did you work all together in Manus and Nauru?
Well, I can't exactly remember.
About?
But I was there, I think, on Manus I was sent there for a 6-week rotation initially, but I was there longer. They actually kept me there longer. And so I think it would have been more like 8 or 9 weeks. And then we would come home for 6 weeks, which, you know, you actually needed.
You need it, yeah.
You need it. And then I was supposed to go back to Manus, but at the last minute they changed the plan and sent me to Nauru instead. So that was what happened. And so, you know, how did I manage? I did what you would do every single day, you know, meditate. I meditated. I just wanted to spread loving kindness. I just wanted to be that embodiment of compassion that, you know, my professional training and my spiritual training have taught me that is what is important.
But there must have come a time when, you know, you felt like, I really need to take a break from this. I mean, you know, compassion fatigue, all of those different things set in. And you're telling me that the way you've managed that is through creativity. And we'll have to have another session for that, because we've also come to nearly the close of this. But when is that point? You know, resilience is so important in life, but many of us, and fortunately, you did have a choice, fortunately, that you could, you know, pull back and look after yourself. So how do you know when it's time to do that? Because I think sometimes people stay too long and maybe reach a point of not being able to recover. So how do you know when it's that time, that it's really a time to self-care?
That's a very interesting question, and it is something that is very widely and deeply discussed in our field. You know, there's this term called burnout. And at some point I went and there was a trainer came to Australia from Canada. Her name is Vicki Reynolds. And she's really an extraordinary woman who has worked with refugees. She's a clinical psychologist,
right,
with a PhD. And she always says with a PhD, because nobody listened to her till she got a PhD. And so she had worked with marginalised, oppressed groups, you know, women escaping, you know, in domestic violence situations, homeless, refugees, all these marginalised groups. I think she comes from Vancouver, I'm not sure. But she was running workshops, and she said burnout is not what we are told. She said, you know, we're told that vicarious trauma is what we get from our clients who tell us their stories of their sexual abuse and blah, blah, blah. That was never my experience either. She said, what causes burnout is not vicarious trauma. It's when you're working with marginalised groups who are being oppressed by your government and your authorities. And I started to actually really understand what was happening to me and my colleagues because we were suffering. Yeah. At this point, I was no longer working in the system because we'd all been terminated. 95% of us have been terminated by the Prime Minister. But we were, you know, just because you're not in that system anymore doesn't mean you're not dealing with the effects. The effects were terrible when we stopped. And so what I understood was how psychologically I and my colleagues, because we were there watching these people, it's called white torture, this psychological torture and imprisonment. We were a witness to that day in, day out. But what we were unconsciously doing was taking responsibility for what was happening to them, because the government wasn't taking responsibility for their own actions. So we were. And when you're an empath, it's pretty hard not to unconsciously or subconsciously do that. You actually don't know you're doing it. And so this was causing us, problems. And it wasn't just me. I was in touch with a lot of my colleagues going through the same sort of, everything seemed meaningless when we left that work.
So problems means what was happening
Trauma.
to you?
Trauma. Trauma. It really, really emerged very, very strongly over time. And, I've specialised in working with complex trauma for 30 years. I'm highly trained in this field. And I was able to manage what was happening with me. And I use the word manage.
Yeah.
But I could not really heal myself.
Yeah.
And so I was suddenly in this position where I understood what my clients had been going through all these years.
Sure.
And it was the most unbearable experience.
Yeah. And I've heard, there's a term that I hadn't heard before, but now with COVID, and what's going on and all kinds of complications, this thing called moral injury. So when you talk about walking that avenue of shame.
The walk of shame.
Walk of shame. It's like a moral injury because
well,
can I be out here and what more can I do? And it's
and moral outrage. I mean, I was very clear about what the trauma was for me. Was a combination of moral outrage, grief, and trauma, because trauma is a very physical type of, it's energetic. So it's, you feel it energetically and it's like your energy's doing this.
So Judy, we've come to the end of our half an hour, probably a bit over, but what I would like to explore, if you're willing to do a part 3, because what I understood is the way that you began to cope, and probably still healing, is through creativity.
That's true. It's been going on for years now, and I've had quite a considerable shift in my work and my life in that healing pathway.
And how are you now with the trauma? How are you?
Much better, thank you.
But still needing to do more work?
Yes, I think the developing my creativity in terms of writing has been very, very important far, and will continue to be into the future. And writing has been a real kind of lifesaver, exploring my creativity and developing it, which is, I've spent a lot of time doing that.
So I'd like to talk more about that, because I'm curious to know, but we won't go into it now, whether you're still connected with that work or whether it re-emerges the trauma, whether you need to be completely away from it, and how does that feel? So if
I need to be completely away from it.
Yeah, I would imagine. And
yes, I can't even watch things about refugees on television, or I can't go there.
Yeah, I can imagine.
I'm done.
So thank you very much. And okay for another one, Judy?
Yes, definitely.
Wonderful, because this is really a very big journey that you've been on. And I just wonder if you could share with us what you do to bring that inner calm. You know, when you're confronted by, what would you like to choose? I mean, you're confronted by many things, your past memories, by outrage, by, you know, what, anyway, I'll leave it to you. You'll be guided to maybe just share something so that we can also go away with, because it's quite traumatic even to hear about it, because it's here in our country, you know, I mean, it's not another country where this is happening.
No, it's not.
Yeah, so can you leave us with a healing feeling, please? But I'm so glad you were honest and open and shared really what's going on and what it's like.
Thank you. Okay, so a little meditation.
Yes, please.
So I bring my awareness into the center of my being. The center that I feel. Around the heart and within my heart. The part of me that pulses with life and sends that life force to every atom and cell in the body. And it is here in the center of my being that I experience and so when I am in an environment where there is overwhelming pain, trauma, this is a place of calm, stillness. And when I bring myself into this beautiful space, I can just feel the peace and the calm, the love and the compassion that are the foundation of who I am. And this is what I can give through my own vibration of serenity. From this place, I restore myself. And I gather any scattered parts of me. Reunifying my inner self. Reforming and with this awareness, I understand exactly what I can give. And how important this gift is.
Oh, thank you, Judy. Very still and empowering. So I'm sure everyone listening really was able to drop down, as you said, let people drop down into that released state, isn't it? So thank you once again, Judy, for very deep, insightful, compassionate sharing. And we'll see you next time and explore how to recover from trauma through creativity. Okay, thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Morny. Bye.